Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to have you here with us this afternoon. So as the Abu Dhabi art team informed me, for those of you who would like to have a translation to Arabic, that you can just follow the instructions on the screen and you will be able to access that feature as well. So the talk will be translated to Arabic simultaneously. So to start, my name is Mikaela Wattrello. I'm the curator and director of exhibitions at Bassam Freiba Art Foundation. For those of you who don't know, Bassam Freiba Art Foundation is the first private art foundation in Abu Dhabi in the Saadiyat Island. And we are literally a small walk away, about 200 meters from Manarat Al Saadiyat. So if you haven't discovered the space yet, please make sure to come and visit us. We are a non-for-profit and philanthropic institution founded by His Excellency Bassam Said Freiba, who opened the foundation with the vision of sharing his private collection with the public, but also inviting other collectors to join us in this mission of exhibiting artworks that would otherwise remain hidden from the public view. Currently, we are exhibiting two exhibitions that might, at the first glance, feel very different, but as we will discover today, there are more commonalities than one might think. We do have a 60-year retrospective of a very important modern Arab artist, Naja Mahdawi, who we have the honor to have here with us in the audience. And we will be particularly looking at his interpretation of the 1001 Nights through his illustrated rare editions of this tale. And on the other side, we are exhibiting exhibition that is dedicated to exploring the recurring archetypes of the Orientalist art movement, including really important 19th century Orientalist artworks. So we have with us also Matias Arijan, who is the leading expert in 19th century Orientalism. So with these two exhibitions in mind, we are going to look at how contemporary Arab artists are engaging with 1001 Nights and their enduring legacy, and the way, in contrast, Western artists historically imagined the East through them. The core question is, how does the enduring legacy of 1001 Nights continue to shape and challenge perceptions of the Orient in art, past and present? And to help us understand a question like this and many more, we have a really distinguished panel with us today. We have, as I already mentioned, Matias Arijan, owner of Arijan Gallery that you can find for the second time at Abu Dhabi Art Fair, and a leading expert of 19th century Orientalist art. We have Professor Mouris Pomerantz, who is the director and professor of literature and Arab Crossroads at the New York University here in Abu Dhabi, and Malka Mahdawi, Naja Mahdawi's foundation president, and a co-curator of the Choreographer of Letters retrospective that you can currently see at Bassam Freiba Art Foundation. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us to shed a bit more light on this very complex theme. So without further ado, I will address my first question to Mouris. If you could please paint for us the big picture. What makes the 1001 Nights such an enduring work, and how has it shaped imaginations across centuries and art forms?
Oh, well, it's a very big question.
Indeed.
I think the first thing I would say about the Nights before we begin, they're great. For those of you who know just a little bit, you probably know about this amazing, at the center of the Nights is this amazing teller of tales, Scheherazade. She's telling the tales to save her life. It's very important. The tales of the Nights, one could go in many different directions, but I think the first thing I would like to say about the Nights, it's this incredible source of stories. Both Scheherazade, under the pressure of the moment to keep the audience enraptured, the audience being Shahryar, who had that murderous habit of killing. It's a bad habit, because he had lost faith in women. That's the backstory from the frame tale of the Nights. If you don't know this, please get yourself a copy of the Nights and read and enjoy. But at any rate, to halt that impulse of Shahryar, she kept him enthralled. ending the tales just at that point where one would desire the ending. You want to know what is going to happen next. And of course, Scheherazade stops. So it's kind of a story. The big story of the Nights is a story about stories. That's one, and about desire. So that's something that I've always thought deeply about. I guess when we now, to paint a big picture, the story of the Nights begins with a person. That's the manuscript. In fact, oh good, that's the person, in a way, Antoine Galland, who is sent on a mission from the Bibliothèque du Roi, and he acquires a manuscript in the early 18th century. This is the Galland manuscript, which is in the Bibliothèque Nationale. This is the manuscript he acquires. He's what one would call an Orientalist. He learned Latin and Greek by the age of, it's astonishing, Latin and Greek by the age of 11, Hebrew, Arabic, Persian, etc. And he's a traveler as well, so he is sent on a mission to collect manuscripts. We have actually his diaries, etc. Galland then acquires this manuscript and translates it. It's actually his second work. He first translates the word Sinbad. And this translation becomes very popular. In fact, I think we had the frontispiece of one of the first editions. This is the early 18th century. It is already popular in the French court. Within a period of 3 or 4 years, there are Grub Street editions in English. This set of stories captures Europe's fascination with stories, and I think a fascination with the East. That's the big picture. So for folks like me, the Nights, on the one hand, I have a kind of an idea of them as sometimes a palimpsest for Arabic literature. They stand in the place of classical Arabic literature because they're the most famous. In fact, they're the group of stories that very much were taken on board by the West as Arabic literature. So it's kind of a dream of the East. And for a long time, we didn't know, actually, from the time of Galland until actually a chance discovery. Like I said, the Nights are an engine of story. For a good, in this case, 250 years, we didn't actually know how old the Nights were, and were they, were they just a product of a kind of a late compilation? Were they from the 15th century? Because our first manuscript comes from the 15th century. Do they reflect that? There were always kind of a mixed bag of stories as well, stories that came from everywhere. There are elements from Persia, from Egypt. In fact, the frame tale of Scheherazade is said to be a Sanskrit story originally. A chance discovery in 1950, as a scholar was looking through old papers which were collected in Egypt at around the turn of the century, which were thought to be just refuse. Somewhere here you'll see an image, and it's basically the first page of the Nights was found, and it's among the oldest pieces of paper that we have in Arabic. The other, to tell you, it's from the 9th century, so very close to the time of Harun al-Rashid and the events actually that are recounted in the Nights, which says to us perhaps that these stories were around. They were oral tales, but they were also being written down. So the Nights are not a palimpsest, perhaps. They're everywhere and nowhere because we find them in these late manuscripts, but then we found an early one, and then, so it's a puzzle for us. But I think for me, there's something about them, maybe we could talk about that later, that represent a tradition of oral storytelling that is so deeply part of the culture of the East, and certainly go all the way back to Abbas of Baghdad.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Maurizio. And really, I think what we all agree on is that the stories were so enduring that they did continuously influence different aspects of the culture and the arts. And that brings us to the second question to Matias. So, as a leading expert in Orientalist art, how did the 19th century European painters constructed their visions of the Orient? Specifically, which archetypes recur and how far do they echo these popularized images from the Arabian Nights?
Thank you. Yes, it is very important to note that there were two artistic movements in Orientalist works in the 19th century. Artists who traveled to the east thanks to military expedition or simply by their own means, traveled by a desire to discover unknown lands. They were adventurers given the health and financial risk of the time and the length of such a journey. After braving the many perils of the journey, they were all captivated by the colors, light, and life they discovered. Their artistic sensibilities were awakened by so much novelty, and they became witnesses of their time. They brought back striking accounts, and they helped to advance relations between culture. Another category of artists existed. European painters who were influenced by travelers, accounts, or literature. Example including Victor Hugo poem, The Orientals, published in 1829, and the Tours of 1001 Nights. We discover a dreamlike Orient, sublimated and detached from reality. These representations are very popular in Europe and fascinate a wide audience. These early influences gave rise to two categories of artists, those traveled and those who remained in Europe. We can pause to consider that the case of Eugène Delacroix in this painting, The Death of Sardanapalus, date 1827, the work refers to the drama by the English poet Lord Byron, translated into French in 1821. This work already displays many characteristics of a painting from the Arabian Nights, with its dramatic tension and vibrant colors. However, at this time, Delacroix had not yet traveled to the east. It was after his first trip to Morocco in 1832 that Delacroix became more a painter witness, producing numerous watercolors on site and painting scenes of everyday life in a more restrained style. The influence of the Arabian Nights can be felt, especially in the depiction of harem, women of mysterious beauty with sumptuous fabrics. We know that harem forbidden to men and painters, which reveal the imagination of the painter who depicted this scene. The great archetype of Orientalist painting are harem scenes for representation of women and warriors or horsemen for representation of powerful men who hold power. So,
yeah, absolutely. So we see this sort of a recurring influence that even for the artists who would never step a foot in the region, by sheer exposure to the stories, they had this sort of a feeling and a sense that they understand the region through the literature like the tales.
Exactly.
But Molka, we are now moving to you to tell us a very different story. So how did your father, the very acclaimed artist Naja Mahdawi, first engage with the Nights? Could you share, please, the path from the childhood oral storytelling all the way to the later research and the culmination in the silkscreen portfolio that we can also see exhibited now at the Bassam Freiba Art Foundation?
Yes, thank you. Welcome, everyone. So, can you hear me well?
Yeah.
So, to prepare the panel, as my father doesn't speak English, I will try my best to represent him and to convey. So, I had to trace back and ask him so many questions to understand. Actually, I never questioned so much how he came about to create this artwork, and I also dive deeply in the 1001 Nights. So the story of the creation of this portfolio could be in itself one of the tales. So here I am saying a story about the night. So this mise en abîme we're talking about. So he always been passionate about research and history, and the core question for him was always identity, cultural dialogue, and the relationship between culture in the sense of how do we perceive each other and how do we represent ourselves and how the other represents us. All this question of mutual dialogue and perception, what is understood, what is misunderstood, what is lost. And so since his childhood, he was collecting postcards of landscape, of Italy, of cities, of nature, and he was always interested to know why they chose to represent that, about that city. And later on, that led him to collect, he has a collection of 7,000 black and white postcards that were produced in Tunisia under the French protectorate till the independence. So in all his travel, he collected these postcards for two reasons. One is the representation of scenes of life, architecture, women, but also for what was so interesting for him was the handwriting. And he was reading every postcard, what they were writing about the culture they were living in and how they were describing it. And it was such a rich historical material. And then we continue through his life, and all this passion for research and also literature led him obviously to the 1001 Nights. So his first contact with the 1001 Night, being Tunisian, growing in Tunisia, was in his childhood during the Ramadan nights. There was someone from the family that would say stories. So he don't remember if it was accurate 1001, but it was the 1001 Night coming in this way. Then fast forward, then he lost contact with the tales and he discovered it again as an adult with this lens of being so interested by the tale themselves that are this story within the story within the story, and that take you really so far into bending your mind into this process of you forgot the beginning of the story and you are in the new story and it's almost realistic. But what was very interesting for him was the context of the tale, the history, and the bridge they played between the culture. What was transferred to the West, what was lost in translation. He discovered that some tales were added, not many of them, but few tales were added by Galland that were not in the origin. So he was trying to understand this relationship again between culture. So now how this came into existence. In 1988, he co-created in a whole week around the French poet Michel Butor, if some of you know him. He's a French poet born in Tunisia. So they invited him in Tunis with the French Institute and the Ministry of Culture in Tunisia. And there was a lot of activity through the week. There was one exhibition of 3 Maghribi painters. There was Rachid Qureishi for Algeria, Mehdi Qutbi for Morocco, and Mehdaoui for Tunisia. There was a dance ballet created by Anne-Marie Selami, a Tunisian choreographer, inspired by Michel Butor. That was really very interesting, and they collaborated with Naja. They used the body to create the shape of the letter in movement. It was really interesting. And there was a conference on the theme of writing, scripture and writing, the parallel between scripture and writing. And the moderator, Michel Butor was there obviously, and the moderator was Jamaluddin Benchir. And that's how they met in Tunisia in 1988. And I will, to be accurate and present well, Jamaluddin Benchir, he's a Franco-Algerian poet, scholar, and translator, renowned for his work on medieval Arabic literature and his French translation of the 1001 Nights. He translated them with André Miquel, a French historian and scholar of classical Arabic literature. So in 1991, they published a translation of around 200 tales with a very rigorous approach, comparing several manuscripts, and they established a critical corpus, and they sought to reproduce the style, the narrative structure of the classical Arabic manuscript. They try to be as close as possible and to respect the original language, the Arabic language, and the particularity of the Arabic language to the formulas and the narrative frames. So to do this translation that later became, was published again by the Pléiades in 2005, but this time it was the first and most complete version so far in French. It was 1,205 poems, including 1,205 poems that were not published or known before. And they based their work on 4 canonical editions. And that's what I found. And the version that it used in this tale come from this translation. So they took the Boulaq edition, which is the first edition printed in Arabic in the Arab world in 1835, the Macnaghten or Calcutta II, that gathered the tale that were brought to India. Then the Cairo edition that was in 1920s, 30s, that was a revisited of the Boulaq. And the Mohsen Mehdi or Leiden. So Mohsen Mehdi, he focused on the 14th century Syrian manuscript and 9 other manuscripts that considers as classic Arab manuscript. So they really went to a very deep effort and thorough study of, they went and visited and to all this manuscript. I found very interesting that it is a collaboration between an Algerian and a French specialist. So we have these 2 cultures merging into the translation, which I really love as well, this collaboration. So they integrated the Indian tradition, the Egyptian tradition, the Syrian manuscript. So I will take the word of Maati Qabal, who's a Moroccan author who spoke about Jamal ad-Din Benshir. And he says his approach and aim was to liberate the Orient from the grip of Western Orientalism. In his translation, far from the cliché, he worked with his friend André Miquel to convey a complex Orient, a poetic reservoir, but also a stage for the tragic. So it is that rigorous and authentic approach to the 1001 Night that interested Njah the most when he met, because when they met in 1988, Jamal ad-Din Benshir was in the process of translating. He was deep into that process. So they talk about it, and he got fascinated by the approach and all the manuscript they were researching. And he said that he wanted to collaborate artistically with him on the tales. So Jamal ad-Din Benshir, after going back home, sent him the unpublished manuscript of the tale called Ali ibn Bakar and Shams al-Nahar. Shams al-Nahar means the sun of the day, containing these unpublished poems that you can see in italic in the slides. So this tale was very dear to Jamal ad-Din Benshir. It's told by Shahrazad over 17 nights. It's not a very long tale. If you're familiar with the tale, some are extremely long. So it's set in Baghdad during the Caliphate of Harun al-Rashid in the 8th century and the Islamic Golden Age. So this story is a bit unique. There is a lot of love story in the 1001 Night and a lot of passionate story, and so many things happen to the lovers. But this tale is the story of a tragic and fatal love between a Persian prince, Ali ibn Bakar, and the Caliph favorite concubine, Shams al-Nahar. So it's happened in the atmosphere, tension, and luxury of the court. And I don't know if I should spoil the tale if somebody reads it or not.
It's okay, we can have
okay.
spoilers. It's been around for quite some time. So
at the end of the tale, they die of love. That's the tragic part. And they die at the same time. So Jamal ad-Din Benshir, in his own word, say that the tale speaks about passion and absolute love between Ali ibn Bakar and Shams al-Nahar, a passion close to the experience of mystics who annihilate themselves in God, al-Fana. And in the tale, the 2 lovers are consumed by their love in the same way mystics are consumed by the love of God. So it implies that the mysticism exists in human love. The French part of the title, La volupté d'en mourir, is not in the original Arabian title, and you could translate it by the ecstasy of dying of it. So it really relates to this ecstasy, the mystical ecstasy, but that is in this tale happened to these 2 lovers. And in just words, it's also this approach to love, the art of living, and extreme refinement in social relationship represented in the tale that drew him to work on the tale. Because everything is so, if you read how they because at some point, obviously, if you're the favorite of the Sultan, it's quite difficult for the Persian prince to access her beloved. So they exchange through letters and emissaries that bring the letters. And if you read and then very often also there is music and they sing their love. So
thank you so much. I mean, this is really fascinating, and especially to think about, only hearing your take on it, how rich that stories are. So I can only imagine that what Matias touched upon, that for the artists of the 19th century who did not have the luxury of traveling, but were exposed to literature like this, and they had this access to such a colorful tales of enduring love and the tragic of love. So Matias, how do we see this translated in the paintings themselves? How the 1001 Nights shaped what we now see in the art?
Yes. Here again, there are Orientalist painters who have never traveled, but who have an almost ethnographic vision, thanks to the stories they have access to, but also to the new tool for sharing image made possible by the development of photography. Conversely, other painters who have not traveled take refuge in an imaginary Orient through literature or poems. There is not a noticeable lack of realism, as men cannot have access to the women's quarters. The sensuality of the scene is sometimes exaggerated, not to objectify women, but to inspire the imagination of past lovers and transport them for a forbidden world. The best example is Jean-Dominique Ingres, the Turkish bath, made in 1879. There's a great portrait painter, the favorite of the Orléans family, reproduced a painting at the age of over 80 that reflects an Oriental imagination full of forbidden desires. However, this representation did not come out of nowhere, but from the letters of Letty Montagu, wife of an English ambassador, who recounted her own experiences during a trip to Turkey in 1716. Also, the painting is now in the Louvre. It caused a scandal for a long time and was not shown to the public until 1905 Autumn Salon. It was rejected twice by the Louvre before being accepted in the 1911 thanks to a donation from the Friends of the Louvre Society. I believe that the dreamlike, fantastical Orient allowed a wide European audience to fall in love with the East. Even so, this work have no historical basis. They were a formidable communication tool and remain today a vehicle for connecting our culture. Even today, the Orient continues to inspire our dreams. One need only look at the dynamism of Abu Dhabi, for example, your foundation, and the region of the world, where art is at the heart of the most beautiful projects, and Europeans are currently fascinated by the many artistic projects being developed here, just as they were in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is really important when you said it's the dreams and it's the imagined. Yes. And that I think would really lead me to your perspective, Mauris. And it's a bit of a combined question on translation and reception. So Orientalism often turned language into image, world into picture. But in that context, how did the meaning of the nights shift gradually? What changed when a very layered poetic corpus encountered this Western imagination?
Yes, the Nights, I think one thing I guess I'll say, they've been a site for the search for authenticity for a very long time. And in fact, as you mentioned, these later manuscripts and things, one funny aspect of the 1001 Nights is that the earliest Galan manuscript only contains 281. And so a passion, because Orientalists were a positivistic lot. I think, to some degree, have a positivistic side to me as well. They were off on the chase for the missing knights. And kind of the East supplied. And so these later manuscripts are fuller, but of course, are they authentic? Are they not? The one story you mentioned is actually in the Galan manuscript. So actually, we know it's quite old. We'll get to that. But maybe I'll talk a little bit about the knights and how they were picked up and why they almost ask, again, desire. There's desire for image, I think, for a couple of reasons with the knights. First of all, I think something you definitely mentioned, it's a lovely point about the very story we're talking about. There's poetry, there's an oud, they're always fainting and rose water is sprayed upon them. There's a lot of rose water used in that story, I was counting. It's just, everyone is fainting. And, you know, the narrative itself, I think, to me, it actually, for our tastes, perhaps, maybe 18th century we're more patient readers. It actually is kind of yet another love poem, yet another person fainting. But the knights are very, and this is true of Arabic literature as a whole, are very synesthetic. So there's a lot of things going on. A lot, when you're reading them, you're switching from poetry, from prose to poetry. And so you're actually at the performance, and the oud player, the lute player is playing, and you're hearing it, and the words are ringing, or you're listening to the letter being read, and you kind of can imagine, actually, the sight and the scene, and this, you know, this beautiful young woman reading this elegant letter to this love-struck young prince. I mean, they're asking, our desire is to see. And I wonder, you know, on some level, of course, that is part and parcel of what the Arabic tradition does. It's, you know, aniconic, and yet, boy, the greatest word painters that have ever lived, I think, were those poets of Baghdad of the 8th and 9th century who gave us this language where the full, you know, Badr is the face of a beautiful young man or woman. Shams al-Nahar, even the names themselves, the sun, her face lights up. Her eyes are like narcissus. There's a whole code, it's called adab, which means both politeness, but also this very code in which language yields image and symbol. That's why they immediately yield, and I'm sure they yielded for Galan, to image. He must have been dreaming. And by the way, Galan, he did this in his off hours. This was his truant work, translating. He was, I mean, you know, imagine it. Yes, he had an official position, and this is what he did for pleasure. And actually reading these stories, you see pleasure come forth, because they're whoever had committed them to paper had a sense of pleasure, because they give that. And I think they're almost asking for the desire is the next, you know, it's the next thing. And that to me is very interesting. There's something spare about them, but also full.
Exactly.
I could expand on that, but
No,
I'll just leave it there.
See, and from the passion that you speak about it, I can only imagine, and these are actually the recurring archetypes that we see repeated in the Orientalist artworks. And when you visit the foundation, we structure the exhibition to really shed light on the oud players and on the barkets and the harems, these really recurring pictures that come back again and again when you are reading the Thousand and Night Stories. But Malka, Naja engages with the tales in a completely different way, right? He translated it into his very distinct language of the calligraphic abstraction. So it wasn't really illustration of the stories, right? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
So also I asked him how was the process, but I also lived it because I was old enough to remember the process. So it took around 3 to 4 years from the moment he received the manuscript, and the first stage was to compose the artworks in close relationship to the text and to the rhythm of the reading. So as you can see, there is really a dialogue between. So he first composed the artworks, the graphism, and then they composed it with a graphic designer on the pages to match that you can have all the text composed with the graphics. At that stage, all the composition were in black and white only. And then the double page is 76 centimeter on 56, and they created a dialogue or dance of the artworks with the text. And it's when they did the silkscreen prints, by passing on the canvas, the silk canvas, the colors, he could integrate the colors within the composition and express a deeper layer with the colors, working in combination with gradients, as you can see here. So on silk screen, when you pass on the screen, you can have one color or several colors. And what he did in this collaboration with the silk screen printmaker was to put different colors on one screen and on the passage. So each page is a unique combination of gradient. You cannot repeat it. So it is silk screen, but at the same time, each page is unique. So it is an edition of 40. So to answer more precisely your question, when I discussed with him, the other aspect is that he wanted to express the feelings and the movement of the tale, the richness that we say, the cloth, the fabric, the textile, the silk, the jewelry, the architecture, the garden. So you cannot see it literally, but you can feel it. So for him, the approach of the work is not an illustration, but rather for him, it was another artwork as any other artwork that is one with the text. He doesn't see it as two different things. For him, it's an artwork in itself. And he feels that the text is so rich, so poetic, so highly suggestive, synesthetic, like you said, that it doesn't need a literal illustration or figuration. So he conceived it as a contemporary abstract interpretation, a graphic storytelling. When you look at it, you feel something closer to the storytelling in its movement than writing. A musical score, a graphic embroidery, expressing a dynamic dialogue, an interaction, a relationship with the story to express all its richness and complexity. And in his word, he say, I'm rewriting and reshaping the score in my own way. My contribution is in aesthetic vision in harmony with the translation. And he wants to give the reader the space and the time to appreciate the power of the text and the power of the poetry, offering the viewer or the eye the freedom to read beyond the meaning, to perceive more before, after, beyond the text. And for him was very important because he appreciated the quality of the translation so much that it is his aesthetic invitation to rediscover the nights and reconsider the idea we have through a new reading. So that was his approach.
And really something that we discussed when we were preparing for the panel that really resonated with me, that it was not so much about the literal illustration, it was about conveying the emotion and the atmosphere of the tales. And for me, this is the exact bridge that we can see the connection to the Orientalism that you see in the parallel exhibition. Because also when you look at the Orientalists, you often hear the critique of the lack of accuracy and how it's really portrayed through the lens of the Western imagination. But if we took a step back and actually looked at these images not as a desire to convey accuracy, but more a desire to convey the atmosphere and the feeling and the emotion that the Western artists might have experienced when they did travel to the region or not, I think it allows us to look at these Orientalist art pieces with a different eyes and a different perspective. One more question for you, Maurizio, as you have mentioned during our discussions that 1001 Nights remain both central and marginal in Arabic literature in a way, and it's constantly reinterpreted and rediscovered. So how would you say today's Arab writers and artists are engaging with it?
Well, I won't speak to the very, very contemporary because I think in some ways I'd like to just highlight two very important touchstones of the 20th century. The first is very well known. Naguib Mahfouz in his Layali Alf Layla wa Layla, it's translated as Arabian Nights and Days, and it's a marvelous novel. It's one of my favorites, actually. It's when Naguib Mahfouz went from being the Tolstoyan to being, I think, something else entirely. It's a sort of a reimagination of contemporary Egyptian politics of his time. So think Sadat, and sort of imagining that within the characters of the Nights. It's a remarkable novel. That's one. the second is actually the Algerian novelist Assia Jabbar, who has this marvelous story, which is very much a mise en abîme, which is called The Woman in Pieces, which is named after a tale of the Knights. And her pieces become the pieces of being a person who lives in a world. She's actually a teacher of the Knights, who's teaching. She's a classroom teacher of the Knights. And I won't spoil the story because I definitely encourage you to go out and read it. But it's very much, her pieces are the pieces of living a life between Arabic and French. These two, I think, point to directions. It's, you know, the figure of Scheherazade has been very important. I mean, there's too much to say, but sort of as the figure of the woman author, both for male authors like Naguib Mahfouz, but also, I think, very importantly, for someone like Assia Jabbar. So I encourage folks to go out there and read some of these greats of 20th century literature, and you'll find that in the 21st century as well, the figure of Scheherazade as storyteller, she has been on the stage of Arabic literature, and she has not left. She's been there from the time of Shahryar, so it's an imaginary story from the time of Harun al-Rashid until now, and she's one of those figures that will not leave us and still has stories to tell us.
Thank you. That's very, very relevant. And now, being at the fair, I want to ask you, Matias, from the market perspective and the museum perspective, do you see a shift in how collectors and institutions approach art, Orientalist art, specifically when it's brought to the region?
Yes. In the past, it's true that Orientalist painting was able to develop thanks to the expansion of French, British, and Italian colonization in the North, Africa, and the Maghreb. This made it easier for artists to travel, and some lived for several years in Egypt, Algeria, or Morocco, or Tunisia. But painters are artists, no politicians. Some, such as Etienne Dinet, who settled in Algeria, took political position in favor of his host, whom he defended and ended up adopting their religion by converting to Islam. This is particularly powerful and unique example of the early 20th century artist who fully embraced his new cultural identity. So it's very important to know this story. It seems to me that the collector's market is more sensitive to emotion and often turns to Orientalism because of family history. Collectors are attached to dream and emotion, feelings, to dramatic colors and reminders of literatures through the paintings they contemplate. So it's a very easy vision for the collectors. Museum, it's different on the other hand, are more often attracted to represent of a real live experience of the Orient that bear witness to a way of life or tradition. These unique testimonies must be preserved for a historical value. They are a permanent reminder of the ties that have united our continents and culture. So
Absolutely.
It's two ways.
To look at it from the museum perspective,
yes,
from the collector's
but,
perspective.
It's important to have the two ends.
Absolutely. And I would like to conclude the talk with a question to you, Malka. So the 1001 Nights was never really about reclaiming ownership from Orientalism for Naja, but more about rediscovering authenticity and creating a genuine dialogue between cultures. So can you tell us briefly about how he approached his search for the truth through this art and how the Nights helped him explore that meeting point between the East and the West?
So like at the beginning I was mentioning that he is always passionate about cultural dialogue and also authenticity was always at the heart of his practice, and his whole aim was how his wish was to attain universality while bearing witness of his own culture. So how can you engage with the other through your own culture and open to universality? for some of you maybe not familiar with his work, he is not writing anything, so you can think that this is calligraphy and it is written, but there is nothing written, and that was the aim of his approach, to free the letter from its boundaries, from its meaning, from its linguistic and academic constraint, and also with the idea that words can, not always, but they can restrict the meaning, and figuration can restrict imagination. So he wanted to liberate the letter through gesture to become a purely visual, abstract, contemporary art form that carry no specific message, but signify itself, become her own self, the letter. So his aim of his approach was to create a universal platform. For him, art must be a space of encounter. It must be a space where we meet and we interact and where we dialogue. And in that spirit, when he approached the Nights, he said, I approach this tale not only for aesthetic reason, but also out of love to revisit history. And the clarity of the translation opens a dialogue on proper foundation where the other is not caricature. So that was for him, and that's why he wanted to not illustrate it, but dialogue with the tale in this way, that it will maybe open up a different appreciation for the East and than what people are used to picture or see. And his attempt was and is always to express authenticity beyond simplification, to add more information and cultural expression to the dialogue, and that so the dialogue may be rooted in more rich and fertile soil. So we need to continue this rich relationship, and I believe that by adding more and more layers of information, the relationship get more enriched. And like you say, it's very much the case today in the region.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Málka, Mórris, Matias, for this very insightful thoughts. Thank you for our audience joining us for this discussion. And I would like to see if you would have any questions for our panelists here. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. You would have a question? Okay, excellent.
Thank you. So, my name is Renata. I'm with the Institute for Inclusion and Accessibility, and we partner with the Bassam Freiba Art Foundation. And what we do, we provide invitations for people of determination, people with disabilities, particularly those with cognitive disabilities, to engage in art as a part of personal self-expression, always in dialogue with their current exhibitions. So, and we had a design workshop for Naj's exhibition, and we used, basically the idea is calligraphy as a self-portrait. And we also use dance and movements and gestures, and we have been doing this for quite a while now, but we've never had such a fantastic emotional response from our test audience, because they really perceived calligraphy always as something very exclusive due to learning disabilities and such. And all of a sudden, this is also an invitation to their family members. They engaged in this art that is so deeply rooted in their culture, and could engage it with their children with disabilities, so adults, right? And it was fantastic. And the self-portraits they created, it was so rich and really in response and dialogue with the art. So I just wanted to say it opens up so many channels because it's so abstract but moving. So we're looking really forward to our workshop next Sunday. And I just wanted to share this with your father because it was so deeply moving to see how they engaged with it. Yeah, so it's next Saturday actually. So if you're still here, it would be such a delight having you.
Thank you very much for these really kind and inspiring works, and it's so beautiful to see how exactly what was intended by Naja. When you remove the literary constraints, you open a whole new level of engagement. I think we have run out of time, but thank you so much for your attention, and really kind contributions, and I hope to see you all at Bassam Freiba Art Foundation to continue these discussions. Thank you.